Hello.
Hello, this is Phantom Electric Ghost. I have Adam from the Foxfires on.
Yep, that's right.
Cool. Is it just you today?
Today it's just me, unfortunately. Everybody at the moment is kind of caught up with social distancing and everything and the like.
Okay.
I work in home healthcare, so it's a weird kind of mixed bag through this whole kind of thing. Because I mean, I could be a carrier, and I'm not even necessarily like sure at the moment. But I have to go get an antibody test in like maybe like 2 weeks or so, just to kind of like see.
Okay.
I don't want to get too into that. Like if
Yeah.
we don't want to
Yeah.
go down that path, but
Yeah. But yeah, we actually can send the link. Multiple people can be on the call, but if they're not available, that's fine. Um, so I'm Phantom Electric Ghost, and I've been interviewing indie artists for since 2018. And we have the Foxfires. They're from the New York City suburban area.
yep, that's correct. We were originally from Nyack, New York. It's like right in Rockland County, just over the Tappan Zee Bridge or the Mario Cuomo Bridge or whatever you'd like to call it.
Yeah.
But we recently relocated to New Jersey, and we're in Little Falls actually.
Okay.
Um, we're very close to the Willowbrook Mall.
Cool. So you're a shoegaze band. You guys were formed in 2013, and so if I said a band like what is like there's what band would you say in the shoegaze format are you like most like familiar with, or people would have a reference point to?
Well, it's a very complicated question because we don't kind of identify ourselves as exclusively a shoegaze band. We kind of identify ourselves as a seagaze band. Seagaze
Oh,
it incorporates a lot of the elements of shoegaze, especially like a lot of the ethereal dream pop kind of nature stuff. If we
cool.
had to like say like maybe like one shoegaze band that I'd probably say we were most parallel to, probably are you familiar with the band called Ride?
No, I haven't heard them. I know car seat headrest, which I don't know. It sounds similar to the stuff that you do, but
Car Seat Headrest is pretty good. We're big My Bloody Valentine
yeah,
fans.
yeah, I know
Slowdive.
them too.
Oh, they're so good. That's how we kind of bonded when we first met. There was like a few select bands that we all just collectively really began to dork out together, and that was kind of how we were like, okay, this is kind of generally like the kind of direction we were moving. At the time, it was what people kind of without us even like knowing. I think they called it sort of something akin to grunge, which I guess
Hmm.
means that it had like more of a like a '90s alternative kind of
Yeah, we
take
kind
on
of
like
like if you think about the grunge era, right? And you had Nirvana, and you had Pearl Jam, but then the Smashing Pumpkins were kind of more progressive.
yeah, that's the thing that like we like no one really talks about how the Smashing Pumpkins are like the quintessential alternative band when you think about it, because it's
Yeah,
not just the elements of like everything else they got going on. There's a lot of really shoegazy things that go on in there, and it's really nice. It's ethereal. It's got that really thick, shaggy fuzz, and that's
yeah,
what like we always loved. We always that was something that I even set my bass to like similar settings to what Darcy had hers to,
yeah.
in the '90s for her fuzz
I
setting.
really love that band because I'm a keyboardist, right? I'm a electronic musician. You know, I play Moogs, I play Jupiters, and so a lot of what I tend to do, like Rick Wakeman, is big. I'm a big fan. Of, Sun Ra, Herbie Hancock. So when I saw what he was doing, what Billy was doing, I'm like, yeah, I like that because grunge was cool and it was kind of bringing back punk because we had all the hair bands and we had all this excess, and then we got Eddie Vedder being really real and Kurt being real. But then the cool thing with the Pumpkins is they kind of brought back that progressive thing where we can do anything. We can have strings, we can be punk, we can be all over the map. And I always liked the fact that they were kind of like you heard a whole album and it wasn't just one way. You know,
That was
all these
something we
different
really
stuff.
identify with as well. It's interesting you say that because that's kind of how we kind of formed the Seagaze concept. It was partially because we like we have a lot of different influences and they all sound very oceany, but also because I'm not sure if you're familiar with Bruce Lee, but he has this thing, and it's like a speech about it's like a metaphor about being like water because water can be like a lot of different things. Water can crash,
Yeah,
it can be ice, and that's kind of how we always want it to be. It's why should we limit ourselves to what we can be as artists? And that's what the Smashing Pumpkins, like you said, like they've always done. It's great. It's they don't limit themselves to the scope of like we're a this kind of band, we're a that kind.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was watching like documentary. I'm not to jump off, but I'm like, you know, a keyboardist, a modular synthesis, and you know, he's got this massive modular synth he had, and you know, he was playing with all kinds of really cool, you know, synths, and a lot of grunge bands were like, well, they kind of not were anti-synth, and they were kind of going, well, we can use them where it works, and like you said, like what I always like, that's why the sound I have is called expansive sound because I just take everything, you know, and if it fits, it fits. If it's classical, it's rock, it's grunge, it's country, whatever fits my moment or mood. So I appreciate shoegaze or seagaze and what you guys are doing. So we give it to the first question I ask of all the musicians I talk to is like, when did you first get into music? Like, what age did you get into it?
For me personally, I want to say I was like 11 years old. I was like 10 or 11, right around that time. So, I mean, when I was younger, I kind of had like a weird relationship with music. It was almost like it was background noise for me. It was almost like it was there, but like I didn't really like it didn't mean too much to me. It was just something that I could kind of do things along to. And like I grew up with ADHD, so like anything that a 4-year-old kid can kind of like run around the house and like shake a tail feather to, that
Mm-hmm.
that was my MO. And then I heard the Beatles for the first time. My mom, she had Yellow Submarine on VHS, and she played it for me. I was like, oh, I can really enjoy this. This is actually kind of fun. There was something that was like, it kind of sparked an interest. And then my mom got me into this other band called Good Charlotte at the time, and they had like this kind of like rebellious pop punk thing, and it was that Young and the Hopeless album. And I thought the
Yeah.
songwriting was really well done. I thought it was a little different from like what I was used to hearing, but I kind of enjoyed it. But the moment for me where I knew that this is what I wanted to do, and it's a weird one because most people don't expect this coming from me. It was Green Day, actually.
Green Day? You know, Green Day was a great band because they, which album was it? Duke, American Idiot.
I'm gonna be honest with you, and this is the one that always draws the line in the sand for so many people, but it's American Idiot for me. I thought
Yeah.
at the time it spoke to me. It was like something that I think came around at like just the right time. I think it was something that no one was kind of wanting to do. Like it wasn't like a cool thing to make a rock opera in 2004. It wasn't a
Yeah, and it
cool
was a
thing.
punk rock opera, you know.
Yeah, it wasn't, and like a lot of people were like, we shouldn't like say anything that has anything to do with the government whatsoever, and they're like, where is that written down? And
Yeah.
and to me, that was like, wow, they're actually taking a stance on something, and I appreciated the fact that a band was brave enough to actually say something and not be like complacent with everything, not just
Well, it's funny because like the Sex Pistols, you know, they started punk because you know it's like God, you know, you know, the anarchy in the UK and God Save the Queen. I mean, that was rebellious. I mean, that's the nature of punk music. The first real punk band, you know, they got banned. They
yeah.
got kicked off their label because they did God Save the Queen. You
And
know,
that's the most crazy thing, but it's so brilliant. That's the spirit I love of music. It's they there's this one I can't remember who it is. I think it's a he's a poet. His name is Federico Garcia Lorca, and he said this thing a long time ago, and I kind of apply it to music in the same way. And it's like to pick up the pen like is the ultimate act of rebellion. And I think that like in many
oh yeah,
it's because when you're basically like saying something that like is your truth, or you're speaking something truth to power, and no one else is willing to, I think that's the most rebellious and punk rock thing in the world. I don't think punk rock has to be like cookie cutter, this, that, and the other. I think sometimes being
no,
punk rock is like the ability to basically say, I'm not okay with this. I don't care if everyone else is okay with this. It doesn't matter. I'm going to speak my mind for the sheer fact that I'm standing up for what I believe is right, and I'm standing against what I believe is wrong.
yeah, the Clash. I mean, the Clash were the quintessential. They were kind of like the way Rage Against the Machine is today, super political.
That
They were like,
my
you know, almost totally on the left wing, and people were like, what? And it's been the nature of punk music that it's always had that kind of political end. It wasn't just, you know, whether you had the Ramones, they just wanted to play hard, you know, and maybe they didn't really say anything. Um, but some of the other punk bands from the other side of the pond, they were political. From the Clash to the Sex Pistols, that's the way it was going. So that's interesting. I always loved Green Day because they brought that back. And you know, because I'm a kind of a music historian, I listen to like everything, and to seeing that kind of wave come back, Um, it's a cycle. You know, you always when things get a little too progressive or they get a little too out of hand, then we tend to get kind of that kind of real music, not the real, but the kind of feeling. I would call it a punk aesthetic, where you feel like people are being honest, you know, and that's what I like about it. So
Yeah.
that's cool.
Well, that's what even grunge is. If you want to get down to the root of it, grunge is basically an entire backlash to a decade of like excess. It's a backlash.
Yeah, I mean, Poison, Rat, and all these hair bands, they got, you know, all this virtuoso guitar playing. Eddie Van Halen's awesome, but, you know, knowing all those scales and be able to rip through it, people like the fact that, you know, it wasn't perfect. It's kind of like Neil Young and Crazy Horse. Neil Young and Crazy Horse, when, you know, he created Crazy Horse because he said, you know, like he got sick of being pitch perfect when he did Harvest. And he went to Nashville and he was with all these musicians and it was really tight. And then he said, you know what? I want to go in the ditch. So he did his famous Ditch trilogy with like Tonight's the Night, Time Fades Away, and On the Beach. And it's like this raw sound of like, you know, Neil was like a punk rocker in some ways when he has Crazy Horse. He just doesn't care if it's totally pitch perfect or in the same key or just kind of the honesty of it.
Well, he's the godfather of grunge in so many people's eyes, including mine. I mean, like, I mean, as much as people, I think people kind of have a weird take on Rust Never Sleeps, but I adore Rust Never Sleeps. It's a
It's brilliant. It's brilliant. I mean, I like Time Fades Away and I like Tonight's Tonight because that Ditch trilogy where he started it. You know, that's where you get that kind of early grunge sound from those records. But then, you know, he kind of refines it for Rust Never Sleeps, you know, and it's great. I mean, I think it, I mean, I like bands like Who's to Do and the Replacements and Joy Division, and I'm a keyboardist.
I'm about to say, if you enjoyed it, so you're a New Order fan too?
Yeah, New Order. It's like with Joy Division and New Order, they got me into like synths. You know, when I first heard, you know, that the first Joy Division record, and I like the kind of starkness of it, the kind of craft work nature of it, and I'm like, wow, that's really cool. And then they turned it a New Order after what happened to the lead singer, and I'm like, yeah, it was just that's the beginning, kind of the new wave, you know, the new romantics, and I really, you know, as a keyboardist, I'm totally into that, you know, because it's a lot of what I do. But it's just interesting to see where people come from. But yeah, Joy Division is one of my favorite bands of all time. New Order too. But
Peter Hook is actually, as a bassist, my biggest influence. That's who I actually draw most of like my influence from whenever I'm writing anything bass related. I think.
Oh, that's cool.
Oh,
that's cool.
Such a good way of doing it, though. That's what I didn't know what to do as a bass player when I first joined this band because I joined and I was used to a lot of punk, and as you've heard with our music, we're not necessarily like so punk as we are like a lot of other things. I'd say we're probably
you're more progressive. You're more progressive, so you're more wide open. Yeah.
Yeah, and
that's
like
cool.
I didn't know how I fit into that at the time. The only thing I could.
Well, New Order kind of gives it a roadmap, you know, between like New Order and Depeche Mode, and even going back to you know, the first Joy Division record just kind of shows you how to have that stark nature of that, you know, structure. Like Disorder, I just love the way that goes. You know, it's punk, but it's not punk. It's something new, you know, and so you're like, wow, it's like. In the first New Order albums too, it's like the continuation of that kind of Joy Division sound and developing further, and then you get, you know, pretty much new romantic sound, you know, new wave sound comes from that development. And it's always been impressive to me. And, you know, you go back to Kraftwerk, you kind of see where it comes from. But and we lost, you know, the founder of Kraftwerk.
Yeah, about to say week. like shout out. I say we have to say an RIP on this one tonight because that's crazy.
It's like, yeah. So so I can see we've been talking about your influences. But so when did you decide you had a talent and you decided that the bass was going to be your instrument instead of the guitar? Because so many, you know, musicians, you know, they start with piano or guitar. Like, how did you get drawn to the bass?
It's interesting. The bass kind of fell into me. So when I was younger and like I was like, okay, I like music. This is what I want to do. I was in middle school at the time, so I was like, okay, it's got to be like. It's got to be guitar because like when you're like 10 years old, 11 years old, you're thinking like it's got to be the guitar. So I mean, I played the guitar for a little bit, and I was getting better and everything, and then I was about to approach like high school, and I wanted to I didn't want to play my trumpet anymore. If I'm being honest with you, I was like, I want to do my music, but I don't want to.
I played clarinet myself, so I jumped out of winds because like I can't write a song on a clarinet.
There you go. See, like, okay, I'm preaching to the choir on this one. So I was like, okay, I can't think of a way to like do something I enjoy on trumpet. I want to do guitar. So I reached out to the band director. I was like 14 years old. I think I like emailed him from like an AOL account. And I asked him specifically, I said, can I play guitar in the band? And the band director was like, we don't really have room for a guitar, but the person who plays upright bass and electric bass for us is graduating this year, so we might be able to use you for that. And
That's cool.
and so I stumbled into it in the weirdest way, and that's actually where I met our lead guitarist, Christian. I've known him for 10 years of my life at this point, almost 11.
Wow, so you're like junior high school bandmates?
Yeah, I met him my first day of band camp when I was in this one time at band camp. I met him, and the first time I met him, I had long blonde hair. And if you know what my lead guitarist looks like, he's got long, dark, curly hair. He's got like a somewhat tan complexion, and he has a little bit of facial hair above his upper lip. He can grow like pretty decent facial hair, but like there was like a little like it had the little like kind of pencil thin mustache going on. And someone asked me, "Doesn't he look like Slash?" And he's wearing a Nirvana t-shirt. I'm wearing a Kurt Cobain t-shirt, and I was like, "He doesn't look like Slash. He looks like Kirk Hammett from Metallica." And he looked at me. And he pointed, he's like, and you look like Kurt Cobain. I was like, yes, exactly. And we had this weird moment where we just had like a high five that we held all the way down to like the football field. It was a bromance in the making.
That's cool that you found somebody to, when I was younger, I had, garage bands that were made up of my high school music classes. I had a drummer that was in the jazz band. And like, my brother played guitar, and then I had a lead singer that was like trying to be like the Cure, between the Cure and the Human League. He was trying to do that, and I was always looking in the pawn shop for old Moogs, and somebody turned in their D50 or something, and I would try to get it. It's interesting that a lot of musicians, like that's where they start, or they become rebellious or something, and they jump on the guitar as part of like a rebellion thing. But I was a keyboardist. I wanted to be a guitar player, but I couldn't get it. My brother was able to pick it up right away, and I tried, but I had a talent for the keyboard, and I said, okay, that's a good writing instrument. It's the same thing. It actually became even better because I could write everything. And I could write bass parts, I could write chords, I could write for the guitar player. And so that became a real cool thing. And, as a songwriter, I've been, very keen on the songwriting capabilities of keyboards.
Well, they say that if you can play anything that's keyboard related, they say that you can pick up just about every other instrument because you have a fundamental understanding of where chords sit, like as far as steps are concerned. And that's what I kind of wanted to learn when I was in high school, because I didn't really have that outlet. I didn't really have like a way of being like, okay, I got to learn tablature. I'd rather learn music theory. I'd rather learn how to write. I'd rather learn how to be like a musician. And so I was like, okay, I'll settle for bass on this. And the irony of it is that like my best friend, I've known him for 10 years at this point, and he taught me a lot of what I knew. It's interesting to see like two people like grow together. One helps one grow, the other helps the other grow, and then there's something it's kind of like weirdly like nostalgic when you look back on it. It's like to see where people were versus where they became and like where they went. And for us, I knew how to play my instrument. I didn't know anything about music theory. I didn't know how to write. I didn't know why it should be one way as opposed to another. And he gave me a lot of like really interesting fundamentals that I didn't know that I was going to get. And it was brilliant. I mean, I gotta say, it's a really surreal thing to be like in a band and like with someone like that taught you when you were like 14 years old.
So your lead guitar player, he's the primary writer?
I wouldn't say he's the primary writer. If anything, I'd probably have to attribute that more to my lead singer. So this is going to be weird. So there's two Christians in the band. One's named Christian Deanna. One is named Christian Cordero. My lead guitarist is named Christian Cordero. The lead vocalist and like rhythm guitarist, his name is Christian Deanna. Songwriting's kind of a cumulative effort for us because we always kind of like bounce ideas off each other. When you've been playing together for about 6 years, things just kind of intuitively make sense, and you know like what people are going for. So you kind of like over time you're like, well, maybe it should be more like this, and then like the first couple times it may not always go like the way you're hoping it will.
Oh yeah.
But then after a while, like people are like, oh, I'm on the same page as that, and then you kind of like you begin to realize that like you have like more of like a thing than you realize, and that's kind of how it evolved. I mean, I didn't have as active of a role when I first joined, and like I gotta say, like I mean, a lot of our songs like they took flight because we are entirely different people, like in terms of like where we come from, where our influences are. I mean, my lead singer, he comes from his original background was pop punk, and then he moved to like kind of folky, like singer songwritery type things. My guitarist comes from thrash, jazz, and like really weird niche music. I remember one time, I think it was like it was my senior year of high school. He was playing like, I think it's like something like Daniel. Oh no, Pierre Schaeffer, or not? Was it Pierre Schaeffer? Or was something like that. But basically, he was this weird composer. I think in like the early 20th century, and he was experimenting a lot with like just weird sounds. Like he was sampling like trains rolling by, and
field recordings.
yeah.
Yeah, field recordings, and a lot of people are doing like what is called granular synthesis, that actually takes like field recordings and uses them on granular synthesizers to make full polyphonic sounds. I actually talked to an artist in the Netherlands that's a big granular synthesis that actually goes out and takes field recordings of breaking glass and rocks and birds and water, and then puts it on a granular synthesizer and uses it. That's kind of cool. I mean, it goes back to Yes in their first album. That band actually, Closer to the Edge, they took a field recorder into a forest and taped the forest sounds into the beginning of the album. Is this real ambient tape of natural sounds?
I didn't know that's how they got.
And then
that.
suddenly
That's actually...
then they actually have all these Moogs and stuff come in, like a Hammond B3 and the Moogs come in. But the original distorted album is a field recording.
That's actually a really cool like origin story, though. You know what I mean? That's pretty cool.
Well, yeah, it's like I said, I'm a music historian. I love looking at how people produce them. I love the Velvet Underground, Warhol and Lou Reed, and like bands like Big Star, like Alex Chilton, Big Star. That's a rare band. It's like an unknown band. I kind of, Husker Du, is not the biggest punk band everybody ever knew, and most people don't even know who they are. But I kind of go for stuff like that.
Are you a Bob Mould person
Paul
in general? Or?
Yeah. Well, yeah, everything Bob Mould, Grant Hart and Bob Mould, I had everything. I was buying their albums as they came out. I was young. I'm 50 years old. So when Husker Du first came out, I was just totally SST. I was already buying Black Flag off of SST with their label, and then suddenly they came out and they started putting out albums like every 4 or 5 months. And it was like, if you go to the record store when they had record stores, they were just like, wow, who's this band to keep on putting stuff out? And they were just really, they were kind of like before Nirvana. They were like Nirvana. They were doing this real natural punk, but it had this power punk, like, if you ever, if you know Bob Mould, you know what I'm talking about. They had this really awesome counterpoint between Grant Hart and Bob Mould that created power punk. They had melodic punk, which is like kind of weird, but that's what it was. And I was very drawn to it, even though I'm a keyboardist, and like, why am I drawn to that? But I was.
So are you a Replacements fan too?
Oh yeah, Paul Westerberg. I think he's a great songwriter. I mean, I'm always drawn to singer-songwriters, from Dylan to Conor Oberst. Anybody that's a great singer-songwriter, I don't care what genre, I tend to dive into it.
That's like the roots of my punk rock kind of like what I really dig into when it comes to like punk rock is that like it's like that Stinky P where they have like Kids Don't Follow, where like the intro is it's like the Milwaukee Police and they're coming to shut down a show and like everyone in the back's like, boo!
Well, they were crazy punk, but they were melodic as hell. I mean, Paul Westerberg can write awesome personal songs. And when they first started, like Let It Be and Tim, they're not exactly toe
No,
punk. You know, it's like indie. It's college radio. It's
left of the
alternative.
dial.
You know, it was yeah, that was the epitome of college radio. Like Tim and Let It Be were like big college radio songs. When I was actually on a college radio station at Bowdoin College back in the 90s, and there I was playing Tim, and it was actually the 80s, like 86 to 90. And I was playing Let It Be and Tim and, Zen Arcade and Black Flag and all these bands. Like, I was really into it.
They're one of those bands that I appreciate because like they didn't stop their growth. Like they're one of the things that I've always kind of grown disgruntled with about punk rock is how it has to fit what someone wants it to be all too often, and how it kind of is a frustrating thing. It's like, why is there a litmus test for punk rock? It's like,
Well, it's kind of like EDM. EDM is like if you don't follow that structure, then nobody wants to hear it, and then they don't advance. If you stay like the Ramones, you don't evolve. Like the Clash evolved.
Oh, the Clash evolved in such a wonderful way.
Yeah, it's a Sandinista. It was like, it's brilliant. I mean, it's all over the map. It's got, African rhythms. It's got hip hop. It's got experimental stuff. It's not just punk. That's what's the great thing about the Clash.
Yeah, the Magnificent Seven. Like you have like that bass line is just straight up, just such a funky little groove.
Oh, yeah. Well, Mick Jones, I mean, he created Big Audio Dynamite after, because he was going into hip hop. He was going into other things. And that's why the band was going that way, because he was great a composer and great guitar player, and he saw mixing drum machines with hard guitar was actually a good idea, and a lot of bands went that way, and he just figured out how to do it like earlier than a lot of other people. He was kind of on that New Order, Joy Division. He was going that same direction. Which is really cool.
He was riding the new wave, if you will.
Yeah, he was like doing it like in the Clash. And probably why he got kicked out. Besides smoking too much marijuana.
I would say like with Joe Strummer and him, because they at the end, from what I understand, they like hated each other. I mean,
well, he kicked him out. He let the manager kick the best musician in the band out of the band.
Yeah, it's so weird, because you think to yourself, like, what would have happened if, like, because here's the thing, I love Joe Strummer, but like, what if he was like a different type of person? And what if, because I mean, mix up, like, they're like the John and Paul of punk rock.
Yeah, they definitely were.
Yeah.
And what's funny is I saw a documentary, and what's funny is like when the manager kept on egging him to kick Mick out of the band, right? He finally did. And then he realized he made a terrible mistake, right? So he went running to try to find Mick Jones, and he was like on holiday in some Caribbean island, and he didn't know where he was. He went and got to the island, rode a bike all over the island trying to find him so he could bring the band back together. But he'd already recorded Big Audio Dynamite's first record, and so it was never going to happen. So he realized he made a mistake, and he wanted to bring the Clash back together, but it was like too late, because Mick had already gone to Big Audio Dynamite, and it was done. Shouldn't listen to your manager when he says something stupid.
No, honestly, the second someone says something like that, that's a red flag right there. That's like, wow, that flag looks pretty crimson to me.
Yeah, but that's cool. I mean, I always devolve into music history, but so you guys, like, when you record, does one guy bring like the demo, or do you guys just like do everything as a band? Like you said that you guys kind of pull together, but does somebody come with a demo and then you guys change it because you have different personalities, you have different opinions how things should work? So does somebody bring like a song and then you kind of deconstruct it and put it back together?
Pretty much. I would actually attribute that to our lead singer, Christian. So what he generally does is he comes up with like a concept. He comes up with like lyrics. Sometimes they change from time to time. One of the things that we go through as a band is that, like, if a song is in its infancy, we normally 9 out of 10 times do not record it until maybe like at this rate, like I want to say better part of like 2 or 3 years later. That's kind of how we make sure that it becomes what it becomes. A lot of times what we've seen is that people put things out before they're a complete idea. And it's like, do you want to eat like an uncooked piece of anything, or would you rather eat something that's well cooked, well seasoned, and you know it's only good for you? And what happens is the demo comes in, and we're like, it's either going to be like a recording, or it might start as like a subtle little jam at the beginning of practice, and we'll be like, "What's that?" And then and then we'll be like, "Oh, that's this," and then we're like, "Oh, show me more of this," and then we kind of like throw in our things here and there, and like we kind of like take the entire thing apart, see what we like, see what we don't like, put it back together. One of the things that we had to grow on, like musically as a band, was structure, because we one of the things that we've fallen into the trap of quite often is that we're kind of a live band in so many ways. I mean, I think that Nirvana's biggest gripe when they were like when they were like just off of Nevermind was how live
Yeah.
sound was never captured, and that's one of the things that we never wanted to let happen to us. The issue is that with us, we're not necessarily always trying to capture something live when we're doing something in the studio. So we've kind of made like longer songs that are just, it seems like they're good to us because they seem like they're good when they're live. And when they're live, it feels great.
Yeah.
It feels like it's fleshed out. It feels like people are getting into it. You want some vamping there. You want like, you don't need to.
Oh yeah, live playing is totally different than actually constructing like an album.
Yes, exactly. Like preaching to the choir on this one. And so one of the things that we had to work on, like as a group, at, like I want to say for like the first bunch of years, was just making sure that like we weren't overkilling it on the track, but if we are gonna like do something, we're gonna do it because we're feeling it out when we're on stage. And that's kind of like
Yeah.
where we like started to evolve as our own individual characters. We wound up basically saying, this seems a little too long, or here's where this is losing me. We like had to take a step back because I mean, the second you're critical of like your own work, that's when you start to really begin to like figure out what works and what doesn't work. One of the things that like we had the hardest time, and like I want to say the first couple years as a band, we could not accept that we weren't right about our own music in some aspects, and
Oh
we
yeah.
were right, but we
That's all.
weren't.
Well, it's hard when a band gets to a producer, right? Like you could be like, you could have a band and you're a good unit and you're writing your own material, and you get to a producer, and a producer kind of rocks your world because between the producer and a recording engineer, they say no, you should use a different chord, you should use different voicing, you should take this part and don't use that part, and then take this part from the beginning of the song, put it to the end, and end to the beginning, and then you're like, wow, that's not even the song anymore. But that's what you do when you're like recording an album. Like if you're a band learning to play together, you it's a different skill set, but the construction of songs, it's a personal thing too. I mean, I'm a singer songwriter. I'm primarily write everything myself, and I have all this modular gear. I've been writing for like 25 years, and the stuff I know how to do just because of over time. Playing like 30 years as a player, that you learn things. But when you first start, like everybody thinks their first stuff is great, but over time things happen. Like I'm into jazz, and a lot of stuff is like we do a lot of improvisation. If you're into bands like Sun Ra and Coltrane, it's like this is a different type of thing. So if you're into stuff like that, it's a different skill set. You might not hone it in as much as if you're trying to build a pop song. So when you're trying to build a pop song or trying to build like a song that's radio ready or stream ready, it's a different technique.
See, that's kind of always the challenge too, because I mean, it's 2020, and I think it should be no surprise that like, while we were definitely like an indie rock band in so many aspects, we combine a lot of different things. It's not always what's popular, and that's kind of like the uphill battle that a lot of like up and coming rock bands, alternative bands, metal bands, whatever it is, they're basically going against, like they're cutting against a grain at this point, because it's like the machine has decided for you what's popular at this moment and what's not popular at this moment. That's what makes people hate certain genres. I have a weird feeling. It's like,
Oh yeah, well I think like EDM and hip hop and trance and stuff. The problem I have as an electronic musician, you know, you preach it to the choir. As an electronic musician, right? I'm a keyboardist, but people think I'm a DJ. Well, no, I'm not a DJ, and I'm not. And I play a Moog. I play a Jupiter 8.
I was about to say, you play probably one of the most literally godlike synths of like all
Yeah,
time.
yeah, and it's not a CDJ. It's and I kind of get a little upset when somebody thinks that somebody can play a mini Moog is the same as somebody plays a CDJ. I mean, not that the person plays CDJ is not a musician, but playing a Moog is a different
It's
skill
an
set,
entirely
and
different
it's
animal for every different reason.
yeah, yeah, and it's like the people in the way you record a Moog, you don't tend to use the DAW.
Yeah.
We yeah we because we a Moog is all these control surfaces, and it's like every one of those control surfaces is like a part of your instrument. And so when you play it, you can't really play it in Pro Tools, or you can't really use the DAW to actually capture what you do with it. You have to put it down on a recorder and save that. Kind of like what Pete Townsend did with Barbara O'Reilly.
Yeah.
Right? But Barbara O'Reilly and Won't Get Fooled Again were on tapes. And every time they went to play it at a concert, they'd run the tape because that was like a point in time thing that it's hard to recreate. And analog synths are full of things like that. And so if you play an analog synth, you have to kind of be willing to understand that if you want to get it stable, you have to put it down on some kind of tape. And it's not like, MIDI. It's the sound is coming from like an organic instrument, and it changes. If you want it exactly as you recorded it, you have to capture it
Yeah,
on
it's a
tape.
Moog, not an
Or
Akai.
yeah. So you think it doesn't work that way. So it's a different type of thing. And every time you approach it, if you do it a solo, like a Keith Emerson solo or Bernie Worrell solo or bass line, those things are played in real time on those instruments, and that's how it is. Like any guitar player, Eddie Van Halen, he does that solo different. Hendrix played his solos different. Eric Clapton played his solos different. It's the same idea.
Yeah. Well, because I mean, like it's one of those things that becomes like it's a sacred thing to you. Your tone, after a while, your tone is generally what like matters to most people, and with a Moog, tone is everything because you don't buy a
Yeah, totally everything.
Moog for any other reason other than you love what you can tonally get out of the thing.
Yeah, and you can't if somebody said, "Well, I can get that out of an iPad." It's like, no, you
Never
can't.
in a billion years get that out of an iPad, guaranteed.
You can't get it out of a soft sense. You can't because it's all controlled voltage. It's all real analog oscillators. Take 20 minutes to warm up. It acts different on warm up compared to if it's on for an hour. And I have like 3 Moogs, and they all act different from day to day. And I always tell people like my Moogs are actually members of my band.
I completely concur with that statement, though. That makes the utmost sense.
Yeah, because it's like, well, what do you mean? It's like, but they are members of the band because they actually contribute. They kind of drive where I go because they kind of will go where they want to go, and you go
Yeah, and
with
with like guitarists and stuff, like it's interesting you bring up the Eddie Van Halen and the Jimi Hendrix thing because for them they can like if they can change the solo if they really want to, like people generally don't necessarily hold on to like every single thing because at times they're kind of hoping live it's a little bit different quite often.
Yeah, you really want that. Except there's a generation that we have with some of this new music that they want it to be exactly the way they heard it on the record, which is to me has been like mind numbing. It kind of reminded me of the story with the Eagles on the Hotel California concert tour. Glenn Fry and the drummer. I forgot his name. Everybody knows his name. But they were like running the band. They were the leaders of the band, right? And they basically were like James Brown. They find Joe Walsh. They would find Felder if they deviated from note to note exactly the way that Hotel California had to be played exactly the same every night. And I'm like, that's a way to really break up the band. And
I gotta say, like, well, Joe Walsh and like Glenn Fry were like not talking for what decades after that, like.
Oh yeah, because I mean they ended up hating each other because they sat there and they said, "Well, the fans want this to be the same every night, so don't even deviate. Do the songs exactly the way they were." I mean, and that takes all the fun. I mean, Led Zeppelin, all the great bands, they kind of would deviate. They would give you Stay Where They Haven't, but Page would play it a little different on the solo. He wouldn't do exactly the same. You kind of wanted
Well,
that.
that's something that you can get. You can get live that you're not going to get on a recording because, like, I mean, you can listen to Led Zeppelin recordings and you're not going to hear Moby Dick go on for 30 minutes. But if you go to a Led Zeppelin concert, you're going and you're seeing
Yeah.
everything that Led Zeppelin has to offer, and it's is not on the album. The one thing that like is like for like an as an artist for me is a little confounding is like you said how everyone wants it to sound exactly like the recording, because if you want it to sound exactly like the recording in your mind, then why are you at a show? I'm
Yeah, you just listen to it. See, go put it on your phone, your cell phone, and just listen
Yeah,
to it
like I
that way.
mean, if you want to see, if you're just coming to see me, that's great. But at the same time, you're here and I'm on stage. And one of the things that as a band we want to do is we want to give you something that you're not going to get when you turn on that recording. We want to give you like something that we were working on. We want to give you something
Oh yeah,
we have a live version for, because you're here. You're either at a bar or you're at some kind of a festival or you're at this and that, and you want to see something special because you're a part of a moment. People want to feel like they're not being like taken for a ride.
yeah, yeah. But a lot of like, well, I don't know, corporate bands, right? They're kind of locked into musical directors running off of Ableton, running off of main stage, tying it to the light show, and so they get locked in to the light show. They get locked into the things firing off the fire. You know, they get locked into it because, oh, we got to run off the computer, so we got to run the song exactly as close to the record because we got all this stuff coming off of it. And I can understand, okay, you're doing a show, it's like theater, but when it becomes more like theater than music, then it's like, what are you doing? You're an entertainer.
Yeah, like
you know,
I'm here to
you know,
basically do something that is like, don't get me wrong. There's like things that we do that become like sort of recurring staples after a while. Like I mean, for one, there's a song that we recorded a long time ago called "Food for Thought." And the ending of the song just happens to be that I tend to drop my bass and it becomes a big noise rock thing. And there's a
mhm.
noise rock part on the actual recording, but you don't get to basically see me like jump off the stage, run around the entire building, and come in through a different entrance and get back on stage. Because,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that's, but to me, that's like, it may be like slightly becoming repetitive at that point. But the thing that's not wrong about it is the
yeah.
feel. Because I mean, one thing that
Well, it's like, yeah, everybody's got stagecraft. Everybody has their stick on stage. Everybody does what they like. Pete used to do the windmill,
yeah.
you know, you know, and Page used to have that look. You know, they had this kind of look, and Clapton they have these signature things, and Hendrix used to do what he did. But you know, all the great musicians, all Dwayne Allman had a whole stick. But you know, it's there's muscle memory in the being a band that practices. You know, a live band that so this stuff that's like, okay, yeah, you're gonna have that song because you played it 1,000 times, or you played it 200 times, so you know it. But even if you know it, you still kind of go off if the drummer decides to do something different, or a bass player goes off, or the singer decides to change the lyrics because he's feeding off
Yeah.
the crowd, right? So you feed off the crowd and you change the lyric. You know, Dylan is famous for changing like Idiot Wind and changing whole lines in some of his great songs. He would, if you go, you're a big fan of Dylan, you buy his live stuff, you would, the versions of Idiot Wind where he has a totally different set of lyrics depending on what he felt like that day. And he would run a different set that he had. They go, oh, yeah, that's kind of like the unreleased version. He would decide to use it. And that's kind of cool. I mean, Eddie Vedder does that too. I mean, Pearl Jam's kind of like Grateful Dead. They kind of run around. People buy, their live shows because they change it up all the
Yeah,
time.
like I mean that's one of the things that I've like always felt about, like I mean you can always like anyone can buy a CD and like they're like, okay, this is enjoyable, but the thing is you don't always understand the CD until you see something live. And one of the classic cases of this, I'm not sure if you're familiar with, are you a Bruce Springsteen fan by any chance?
Oh yeah, I've got Nebraska. I've got like the great all the great stuff he's done. I mean, I like some of his double records. You know, the River. I don't know people get into that, but I like the River a lot. And yeah, I mean, I like the Wild and the first ones. The first ones before he actually
Well,
broke through.
interestingly enough, there's a version of Born in the USA that's entirely nothing like the version of Born in the USA that like you're used to hearing. You're used to hearing with the kick drum and like, yeah, and like big,
Oh yeah,
oh yeah.
Yeah.
There's a version which is more stripped down, and I think he made it around like maybe Ghost of Tom Joad era. Um,
Oh yeah, I think I got a collection
it's
that had that.
really interesting because I mean it's something that you kind of enjoy it more from the stripped down perspective because it feels more like what it's supposed to be conveying.
Oh yeah. Yeah, totally. He's good, a lot like Dylan because, like, I go back and I listen to like "Tangled Up in Blue" and the famous, from the whole period of time of
Oh
his
yeah,
divorce, right? And there's like the kind of highly produced versions of "Tangled Up in Blue" and "Idiot Wind," and then there's the actual demos of him just playing the guitar, right? And it's just him and his acoustic guitar running through "Idiot Wind," running through "Tangled Up in Blue," and he actually had a jacket with like buttons on it, right? And the buttons were hitting the guitar. And so on the demo, you can hear the buttons hitting the guitar on his jacket. It's like it's actually hitting against it and making all this noise. And so they didn't use it, but it's actually the demo is so good. It's actually better than what's on the album.
I can't tell how many times I experienced that,
And
and that's such a weird thing because, like, I mean, as artists, it becomes like it almost becomes like ritualistic, or maybe at times like like kind of an exercise in vanity. But like we're always like we got to go in the studio and we got to do it this and we got to look like we're really. And then sometimes it's just the simplest stripped down things, the simplest like demos that just catch everything at the right light at the right moment, and they're fundamentally just 1,000 times better. Our lead singer has like solo stuff, and I remember he did a recording of one song, and I remember I heard the demo version, and I said, I mean, I understand that you wanted to hear this like on recording, but there was something about the demo version that it really captivated me. There was something that was very like it felt more. I don't know if the word is authentic.
yeah, it's like honesty. I find that over the years that I that's why I love the Velvets, like the Velvet Underground and Lou Reed. They used to have a habit of maybe going with the second or third take, and then it would sound kind of raw. But that's why the first Velvet Underground record sounds so good because it didn't. You listen to the first Velvet Underground record and then you listen to Loaded, which is their one that was highly produced. Now Loaded is good, but the first album with the Andy Warhol Banana on it, that's not highly produced, is it's like punk. It's really
It's
like a bunch
raw.
of demos,
It's
and
very seedy and
yeah,
dark.
and that always appealed. Yeah, that always appealed to me because I will go back and I'll be with my bands and stuff, and we do like 10 takes, and I'm like, you know what? The second and third take is actually better because by the time you get to the 10th take, you start being dishonest. Not to be like a lot of times you'll as a musician, the first or second take, you're kind of being raw. You're revealing maybe more than what you want to reveal, and then you start stripping it out. You say, "Oh, I didn't want to say that, or I didn't want to do that, or oh, I could do that better." And then you come back and you find out, if you're honest and you look back, it's like, well, maybe the third version is actually better than the 10th or
It's
20th
because you
version.
try so many times, and then like
You
after
know?
a while, it's like it just becomes like you have more options, but maybe at the same time you didn't need like 7 or 8 more. Maybe you just needed to cut it off there. And for us when we were first starting, that was kind of a challenge because we're our biggest critics. We're always like, we can do this better, we could do that better. And the second like you realize studio time is money, you're like, okay, we have to
Mm-hmm.
have an idea and we have to complete the idea. And for us, it became we had to become systematic about it. We had to be like, we can't get too caught up in like how we're like feeling so invalid because the other side of it is that one of the reasons why things like the Velvet Underground's first album and the Rolling Stones like have an entire career filled with blunders on tape. We recorded with Ted Young, and he works with a bunch of people. One of the people that he did like a lot of work for though were the Rolling Stones. He actually had like some like work kind of like remastering some of their historical stuff. I think it was like Charlie Is My Darling. Uh, he's worked with Kurt Weill and like
Mm-hmm.
Nora Jones and like a bunch of people. Oh,
Oh yeah,
we
awesome.
looked him up and we were like, he's the guy. He's got to be the guy. And we were in the studio with him one day, and he was telling us about how you wouldn't if I played you spots in the Rolling Stone songs where they entirely screwed up and no one did anything about it, you would never hear the song the same way again. But if I never told you where it was, you would never notice, and you would think it was, number one, just a good part of the song, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well, that's why I try to tell people. One of the things I don't like about digital audio workstations, and I'm a DAWless recorder. I record the direct recording because I use a lot of analog synth. Is because of that back in the day, when you had a lot of these bands, they used to have happy accidents, and the Stones and the Who and Clapton and Cream. And if you go back and you watch documentaries, and they start uncovering on the mixing board what's really there, you'll hear bad key changes, bad timing on the drums. But if you listen to it all together, it actually brings the character of the song. And there's something if you let the BPM, you let a DAW tell you, oh, you can't do that key with this key, or you can't do that beat, or your timing's off. Well, in the classic songs that we all know, the timing is a little off.
Oh, everything we've heard from every classic rock band, just about, had some level of a tempo problem that people don't talk about.
Yeah, the auto correction on the drum machines and the DAWs is making things too perfect. And I had some guy who says yeah, it's too clean. It sounds great, but it's too clean. I'd rather hear Keith Richards making sloppy mistakes.
And that's part of the joy of it.
Than somebody doing perfect, because those errors are kind of it's the nature of the blues, or nature of rock is that kind of imperfect.
It's the perfection of imperfection.
Is the same kind of beauty in pain. Yeah, I mean, it's the whole point. Is a lot of times in rock and punk, and people go back to punk. Why Nirvana got through is because that kind of sloppiness, or perceived sloppiness, is not exactly always sloppy. It's kind of maybe on, the very good musicians. Is it's maybe you don't do it 100 times. Maybe you don't fix it. Maybe you leave it because it's like a painting. It's like, well, you know what? I'm just going to leave that stroke because it works. And I always tell people, don't let the computer tell you how to be a musician.
Also, I get that we have to strive for being more perfect as musicians, but at the same time, as humans, we're naturally imperfect, and naturally as imperfect humans, we screw up from time to time, and sometimes those mistakes, they build character, and there's nothing that separates that entire philosophy from when you're setting foot in a studio. And I think that people all get too lost in the sauce, and that's it's got to be down to an atom. And I'm like, but you're not Neil Peart. You're
Yeah.
I understand, I get it. It's your baby. It's like your child. And believe me, we're our biggest critics of it too. We're we want the best for our music, but sometimes it's a matter of letting people know that you're flesh and blood too, but there's something that's honest and raw here.
Well, sometimes that mistake can drive you to write the song a different way. If you have a timing change, if you go to the progressive music, like progressive rock bands like Genesis, and yes, there are tons of timing changes, songs within songs, changing, key, and people go, oh, you can't do that. It's like, well, that's the nature of it. I watched a documentary with Peter Gabriel, and he's talking about all these shadow vocals. They used to do these shadow vocals to build them up. And if you listen to them separate, they would sound like they don't go together at all. And then he had experiments, where, okay, we're going to have the drummer do this part, and we're going to tape 100 different versions of the drums, and then they went and took tape and spliced it and then mixed it all together, which is typical kind of progressive rock band type of thing. But it's okay, we're just going to deconstruct. If you go back to Wilco and you go back and listen to
that's
Yankee
interestingly
Hotel
enough
Foxtrot,
one of our biggest influences as a band.
Yeah, they just totally deconstructed. Jay Bennett would take the original Jeff Tweedy, just normal guitar demos, and then reconstruct them like a George Martin, and that it was very imperfect, and it's all over the place, and that's why the Yankee Hotel Foxtrot sounds the way it does, because it's totally deconstructed. using the studio as an instrument.
That's probably the best way I think that.
It was very hard to play live, though. It's hard to play that.
Well, they
live.
still like. There's certain things that they'll never play off of that ever again. I don't think. Like, but you know what's interesting is that it's the most heartfelt, really honest like album. Because, and I mean, have you ever seen the documentary? Oh,
Yeah,
oh
it breaks my
God.
heart.
Because like you begin to like everything begins to unravel for you, and like everything makes sense and everything falls into place. Like you see Jeff, and he's going through weird like divorce problems, like or not even divorce problems, just like marital, like I'm like lonely.
Yeah, he's like going through drug addiction. He's having marital issues
And then
because
Jay
he's drug
dies.
addicted. He's having fights with with Jay because Jay keeps on deconstructing the songs, and and then they end up bringing it to the label, and the label didn't like it because it wasn't marketable, because it was art. It was more like a Velvet Underground record. It's more like a Sun Ra record than a rock record. And that was cool, but that's hard to get people to accept. I mean, it's like Tonight's the Night. The record company like looked at that and they were like, "What's this? You're out of key. You sound like you're crying." Neil was like, "What? That's what it is." he was able to get it out because he was Neil, but
well, what I like about like watching that movie and was like watching them like go from like being on Warner to like all of a sudden after all of that like going to Nonesuch, because if you do a little bit of research on Nonesuch, I believe at the time Warner owned Nonesuch, so it was like almost like they were like, yeah, you did this kind of on our dime, so we're not going to lose much from this because we're still gonna be taking something on the back end. But that album is art. That album is that's one of the things that
yeah, that's the kind of album I always go and say you can't do that in a DAW. You can't. It's kind of like Tonight's the Night. You can't do that on a DAW. You can't do the first Velvet Underground record. You can't do Big Star Third. There's certain like iconic albums that are done, and you say, well, that's kind of weird. Neil's voice is like you say, he's like very fragile. He's kind of like falling apart on Tonight's the Night. And Wilco is kind of like the same thing. The whole band's kind of what Jay was doing that kind of deconstruction to the point where it's not musical in certain places, like on purpose.
What do you call it?
Discord.
Radio Cure. Radio Cure is like even like a really good example of that in the sense that like it almost just begins so like what he's finger picking to a point is like at some points like just very faintly audible, but then when he sings, it all makes sense. Like it all like it fits, and it becomes more like a puzzle piece. That's like it becomes less like rock and roll, and it becomes more like a composition. And I think there's like its own.
Yeah, it's like a sound painting. Hendrix used to call it when they asked him what Electric Lady was. This reporter asked him like, because he heard all these birds and cosmic sounds and ocean waves, and he wasn't even using a synth, And they asked him, "What is this?" And he said, "Well, this is a sound painting." And I always took that. I was like, wow, that's a brilliant thing that Hendrix was kind of talking about what Yes and Genesis hadn't even done yet. But, he looked at it as like, well, this is like, I see music as like colors and like I'm doing a sound painting. and that's what Jay was doing. Anybody that starts to do that on these great albums, like they start to go more and become more like painters, like sonic painters.
What I like about that though, like for example, one of my favorite like acts of all time is just Pink Floyd, because there's something about the fact that everything that Pink Floyd did on tape had purpose. Like David Gilmour, I think, is probably like my favorite guitarist just for the sheer fact that he doesn't do anything just to do it. He does it only if it has absolute meaning. Like,
oh yeah, he's great. I was watching a Wish You Were Here documentary.
Well, like the lap steel solo,
and it was unbelievable.
There's a point in like Shine On You Crazy Diamond where like it's like it's like slowly building. It's like boom boom, and then like after a while the guitar kicks in and it's accompanied by the lap steel, he's playing a lap steel solo as Rick Ray is harmonizing a synth solo, and it literally sounds like an entire descent into madness. And every single time I hear that track, it doesn't matter if it's the first time I heard it or if you played it for me right now, it sends chills down my spine because it's just I have the utmost understanding of everything that was intended, like on that one track, and
It was cool. I was watching also where they Gilmore for one of the guitar parts. He went into a room that was like all by himself with a bunch of amps, and he mic'd all these Marshalls or Orange amps and recorded it in this big open air room to make it sound like it's far away. And when you hear it, it is, because he was. And that's when people have big budgets and they can do whatever they wanted. And but that's the kind of care that used to go into recording when bands would go, oh, I'm going to get this room. If for this specific song that I want the solo to have this feel, I'm going to go to this room because it has this wide open feel. And that is just the brilliance of that kind of stuff. And then just the keyboards on that album and the piano playing is just unbelievable. And they would leave the space like a jazz band, like a Sun Ra or a Davis, and not even sing for like 10 minutes, and that's very progressive. It's kind of what like the bands I love, like, Yes, and Tangerine Dream, and all these bands like that. They would be willing to like service the song, not make a hit. Like, I'm gonna do a 10-minute song or a 12-minute song because that's what it
that's
is.
its own form of beauty to me, and like in its own way though. And like, because I mean, like these days it kind of feels like one side of like humanity is saying you got to create a pop song because I have like a 5-second attention span, and like
Yeah, songs are like 2 minutes and 15 seconds. 1 minute and 52 seconds, and 3 minutes. 3 minutes is too long. Most of this, like so many songs today are so short, and there's like 10 producers. They're taking the same Fruity Loops, the same splices, the same samples, the same drums off the 808 or 909, doing the same thing over and over. And it's destroying music, in my opinion, because it's becoming so robotic, so cookie cutter. Bring the rapper in to do a feature and have him say something
that's what I
inane
don't even
on a pop
understand though.
song.
It becomes
And
yeah, like don't get
what
me
is
wrong. Like
that?
I actually have a special place in my heart for pop music because like I think that there's a lot of good pop. Well, that's the thing. It's
Well,
like
I like pop when it's good.
pop can be great. Like hip hop, literally the
The
Beatles were
Beatles
pop.
were
Like at
pop.
one point, like a lot, like rock was at one point the pop of like that time. And there's still good pop that comes around now and like then, like in even like in things where they do use like electronic stuff. But then you find out like how many of like these things it just feels like it's more forced and it's less special, and it becomes like it feels like I've heard this one 5 times before, and then you find out who was the one who wrote the song in the first place, and it's like, oh, I have heard this one 5 times before because they use the close but no cigar formula. And for us, we don't like that because I mean, like on one hand, we're like,
Yeah.
I mean, we're trying to write something that people will enjoy and will appreciate.
Well, that's why I talk to indie bands. I could interview big bands and make a whole different level, but I like to talk to indie artists. 'Cause I grew up on college radio. I grew up watching MTV 120 Minutes, um, and reading Rolling Stone magazine, and reading the Village Voice, and reading all these, like, going to CBGBs and stuff. So I'm kind of like, I've always, my heart is in the indie band. I was into REM when they were on
Wow.
IRS, before they made it
So
big.
you're like the OG
And
years.
I was into that. Yeah, I mean, that to me is like when you didn't know what Stipe was saying, like on the Reckoning, you didn't really know what he was saying, but it was beautiful, and we're like, I don't really care to know exactly what he's saying. It just sounded good, and people are like, how can you like a band where you don't understand the lead singer? I'm like, because it's like it's
Peter
the
Buck is the
sound,
most powerful right hand in all of
and
history.
the sound was this. Yeah, I mean, it was just the sound of it. I mean, and I kind of got a little let down when I could actually hear his lyrics. I always kind of like, well, I actually like The Reckoning, and I like, Life's a Rich Pageant. I liked it better when it was more, his vocals were more masked, and I understand he got better. And some of the stuff is good, but it's like, I think the IRS years are the best years of IRM. But that's me, because I like that punk aesthetic. I like the kind of early period. and it just seemed like as they got bigger, then it just
Well, at one point they were playing
didn't
with
the
Black
same,
Flag. They were like
you know.
sharing bills with
But
Black Flag. It's a weirdly like.
oh yeah, I mean they were an indie band. I mean it was a miracle that they broke through at the level big thing. I mean most bands at that time never got as big as they got. You know, that was like a big thing. Was like, oh yeah, and then, Who's Kid Who tried it and it broke apart. Um, they got into Warner's. They were gonna get big, and then Grant got into heroin, and then there was a suicide. Their manager and all this stuff happened. But not everybody makes it. But REM were able to kind of crash through that, and they did very well. I mean, I liked the Accelerate. I actually thought that was more like what they used to do. More like Life's with Passion. I actually like that album a lot. But yeah, it's just interesting that the pureness of music always drives me to talk to bands like yourselves. Like your Foxfires. I was really glad I got to
Yeah,
talk to you today
long overdue.
because just chatting about music.
Usually we're scheduled for March, right?
Yeah,
Like it
because
was
I just yeah, things got screwed up. I mean, I'm at home recording. I just been working on. I'm actually working on an album with an Italian producer, and it's like I'm here in New Hampshire, and he sent me a bunch of files, and I'm actually doing all kinds of bass lines on my Moog. I was doing that before I talked to you in my home studio, and go back to that when I'm done. But yeah, it's like I've just found
That's
new
awesome.
things to do. But yeah, I mean, you have to find, your niche. Luckily, because I can play, my modes and stuff, I get calls to work on stuff. So then I work on other people's projects beside my own. But yeah, it's just interesting what this time with the COVID. You're out there on the front lines, and that's really we always appreciate people doing that. I've been kind of locked down just like in my bedroom.
This is the weirdest time.
Just doing my work.
Talking about live bands,
Yeah.
I mean, like through this whole thing, I mean, the weirdest thing for us is that, like, by so many stretches, like, I mean, like we have a presence on social media, but by every margin imaginable, we're a band that we kind of pride ourselves on the fact that when we play live, we're our
You play
tightest.
live. Yeah, that's hard. Yeah, that's really hard. This is like a big kick to everybody. I mean, a lot of like SoundCloud has a thing out there now. If you're at a certain level, you can donate to your band. And Spotify has set up donation buttons, but everybody's hurting, so I don't think a lot of people are donating either.
Thing, yeah.
But they decided to set up a donation button so you can attach it to like a Cash App or your PayPal or whatever if you sign up for it.
Spotify,
If you have that ability,
maybe a few weeks ago, but like at the same time, you're absolutely right. It's a kind of a weird time because, I mean, don't be wrong. Like every dollar helps, but at the same time, like how many people have dollars to spend at this point?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, it would have been nice if they had set that up when people had money.
Like, hey, you can donate to me before you like have no money to your name.
Yeah, before like everybody's like, oh, they just lost their job, so they don't have money either. So maybe you could get us a little higher royalty and kind of knock down how much you give to the top tier. That's the whole thing. And one of the questions we always ask is great that we have these streaming services and SoundCloud and everything that gets us out there. But there's like the top tier of the music business, they get the higher percentage of the streaming income, and then all the other bands we get like 0.006 of a penny.
True.
And so that whole thing is like, well, it's a kind of double-edged sword. It gets us out there like the radio, like college radio. Like now, I got people in Israel listening to me. I got people in Nicaragua and everywhere in the world, able to listen to me. They couldn't do that before. But then 10,000 streams, I get $30.
Yeah.
Versus if somebody had downloaded 10,000, then I would have had $10,000 or $8,000. So the way we make money is through merch and shows. And if we can't do the shows, people don't buy the merch because they don't see us. And so we're all the musicians around the world. I've been talking to bands in Germany and Ireland, Denmark, South Africa, and it's like worldwide. Every band I've talked to, they're like they can't make the money. So if you guys like thought of other things you can do besides your day gigs to like keep your band going.
Like, I'm gonna be like pretty honest here at the moment. Like, so because I've been working throughout this whole thing, where we practice right now is actually the same place I live. I happen to like have like a place where we have adequate space and like soundproofing enough to practice in the neighborhood. And like people don't typically like bother, they don't get too angry, you don't practice too late, but we have a place where we can generally kind of do things. What's so we're kind of able to kind of maintain like being above water in some aspects, but we're also like it's like we're stuck in like in the mud and we can't really get out until we have a tow truck kind of pull us out. I mean, we used to make all of our money off of live
Yeah,
gigs.
yeah.
I mean, and to try and get us out of like the hole at the moment, one of the things that we're really trying to do is like we're just trying to figure out like what's going to happen once this thing lifts. Once this thing is over, that's going to be like it's either going to be we're going to burst out of a gate or we're going to be at a slow crawl. And our goal through this whole thing, what we really want to do is our fan base that we have like consistent. We want that to be built up via social media and all these things. Because, like you said, it's a weird world where like we can be accessed at like the blink of an eye, but you get like maybe like 2 cents a stream.
Yeah, it's harder for a band like you, like, cause I got a bunch of synths, and I can go and somebody says put a Moog bass line down, and they send me a WAV file, and I put it into my hardware recorder, and then I overdub a bass line onto it and send it back to Google Drive, um, and I make some money. I can work on TV commercials and like advertisements and stuff because I can do stuff on my synths that Rock
One of the
Band
things
can't
we're
do.
also trying to pursue
Um,
in that vein is we're trying to actually branch out a little bit more into sync licensing because I mean that aside from live music and merch, one of the things that we've always noticed has been a consistent thing where you can make money has been sync licensing. I mean,
yeah, that's what I'm doing is like I'm doing like advertising and getting like brought into projects. I'm in this thing called a music gateway out of London, and you get to do
that's brilliant.
collaborations. And so a band will say, "Well, I just got like 7 tracks from this Italian producer," and he's like, "Well, they listen to what I do. They give an example of your EPK. They see your sound, and they say, well, I want you to put some Moog bass lines on this, or I want you to put some Jupiter on this." And so then you go and you just you put your flavor onto it. And it's like it's pretty cool that you can act, and I've been doing that before the crisis because I'm kind of like a bedroom artist. But I've kind of been set up to be able to do that. I was doing live streams on Facebook Live for the last 3 years before anybody was like doing that. That's what I do. I mean, I go to New York and play sometimes, but a lot of times I'll go to Boston. But a lot of times I just, I'm a producer, keyboardist that, just continually writes all the time. And I've been able to do that. Yeah, the sync licensing is. I always encourage any artist that needs to get out there. They need to like look at all the sync licensing and find ways to like get on to advertising projects and movies and TV because they still need music for everything that they sell, and they're still selling stuff. So you might be able to still do okay if you can get into it.
I'm pushing for it just about every day. I mean, at the moment, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get in touch with a few different supervisors. We're kind of working with we have like there's a I don't know, it's like a website basically called Song Trader, and you can kind of submit some of your music.
Oh yeah, that's one of them. Yeah, music. The one I do, Music Gateway, is one out of London, but Song Trader, I've been on that one too.
It's a really good.
Yeah, but there's a lot of opportunity. You'll be surprised. People are like, "What is?" Yeah, there's no gigs, but these are different type of gigs. you know, and sometimes they're looking for rock. Sometimes they're looking for punk. Sometimes they're looking for EDM or trance. They're looking for everything, and it's not just the American market. It's like the worldwide market. I saw something where a South Korean musician was looking for somebody to do Moog lines, and then somebody from like Argentina was looking for something, and somebody from Brazil was looking for something. And so there's a lot of opportunities to get into the right spot.
Yeah, for us, one of the things that we've like also been trying to do aside from sync is like we're as much as it sounds weird because like we're not sure how it's going to happen at this point. We're trying to get back into the studio, and this is kind of one of those occasions where we could have had home equipment to record things, and we're kicking ourselves because we were originally planning on getting back into the studio. I want to say just about actually right about now, and we
the time it happened.
Like, we had 3 drum tracks ready to go, and we had basically a full album that we were preparing. Just like we were gonna do our first full length in a while, because we signed to a label out of Norfolk, Virginia, called Brink, and we were looking forward to doing another full length. We'd actually been sitting on a large body of material for, I want to say, the better part of, like, I don't know, maybe like the past 2 years or so. And we've been collecting it, we've been tailoring it, we've been road testing it, and we're like, we finally think we have the right people to release this kind of thing with. We feel like we have the right team, we have the right version of ourselves to be doing. And
to do it. And right when you wanted to go, then you couldn't get in.
and it's interesting because it's what we feel at the moment is by far our best work, and we're sitting on it just in terms of like, when can we go back in? Because we have 3 drum tracks ready. We can lay down 3 songs like pretty much.
Yeah, it's too bad he didn't have like a Zoom L20 or L24 or a Tascam 24 or even like a clone of a of a really good board. But yeah, I mean, I've been doing that's why for a long time. I decided a long time ago, because I'm an IT guy, I went and invested in a bunch of stuff so I can just like record anytime I want. And pretty much, I mean, I work with sound engineers and stuff that sometimes pretty my stuff up, but a lot of what I do, I can do out of my home studio. And then it just gets like re-engineered, and I don't have to really, go into a studio because I can just do it. But my keyboard, so I don't have to have drums and everything mic'd, so I can kind of do everything myself. But yeah, I think a lot of artists I've been talking to in the last month have been saying, well, I need to learn Ableton, I need to learn Mainstage, I need to get a USB audio interface, I need to get some mics, and I'm going to start. If this thing goes on like longer than what I expected, I'm going to have to start thinking about recording in my own capability.
We're contemplating the cost of an interface and condenser mics, because the thing is, where we're currently at, I mean, if we needed to like get the sound we needed out of like where I currently have all the stuff, we could definitely do it. I mean, we could, and the thing is, we actually have someone who might be able to take the tracks and turn them into something mixed and mastered. Great.
Yeah, and if you can get them into like an L20 or a Tascam 24 and any of the, like a Behringer Wing or something, there's some pretty cool units out there that actually like. I mean, I use Zoom R20 an R24, and I can get a pretty good recording of all my stuff, like up to 24 tracks. I can bounce up to 48, and I can have them pretty clean, and I just send it to a recording engineer to tighten it up. But most of it's already recorded. No, it's pretty. I mean, I've been releasing on Bentley Records and Mojo Heads, and now I'm on SoundCloud Repost, and I can get
actually
good sound.
Actually worth looking into for us, because I mean, one of the things that we're concerned about is that, I mean, as much as like we're musicians, one of the things that we kind of have to our fault is that, I mean, when it comes to audio engineering, I mean, we know how to get ourselves sounding right live, but a studio is a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, the studio is harder with like because I have synths that have USB interfaces already, and the quarter-inch lines are pretty good, and then if you get the right kind of audio interfaces, like I go use hardware records that go right to SD card, they don't go through a computer. My R24 can do quarter-inch lines, and they can do USB lines, and it brings it in, and there's no hiss. And then you just can like remaster it on other equipment that I went and got preamps and stuff. But over time, I bought a bunch of stuff, and I can like boost it to like the sound level you need to put out on Spotify and stuff, and all the recording thing. But there's equipment that you can get, and some of it's like very expensive, and some of it's not so expensive. And you can get pretty good results if you invest in it. And I just took the time to do it over time. But there's a lot of cool stuff out there that's actually pretty decently. Like I said, the Behringer Wing, Tascam 24, the Zoom L20. And the cool thing about the L20, you can actually record your practice or your like a live, it's for live bands. and every line that goes into it gets recorded to a track. So if you put your bass line into it and the bass player is playing, it goes to a track automatically. The drummer line goes to a track automatically. Everything gets tracked, and then once it's tracked, you can play them back and you can remaster that track and put effects onto it after the
That's actually
fact.
worth it. I actually might look into that.
So yeah, it's a really cool machine, and you can pretty much capture everything. So every time you're in your practice, you can go grab it, and then you could bring it into a DAW later into like Ableton and move things around. But you've actually captured it on a WAV file, you know, and 24-bit, 42 megahertz, and it's pretty good quality. And if you bring it to a recording engineer, they can usually fix it and boost it up to 96 and tighten it up. So you can get a lot done where you could have a whole album pretty much done without even going into the studio, which, it's just there's the things people have to look at now, because now this might last a little bit longer. If 1918 is any precursor, and I know a little about history because I was a history major, this type of pandemic tends to have 2-3 waves. So thinking long term, it's probably a good investment.
What was it, Spanish flu? Spanish flu had like a way worse second wave, and that was kind of when. Oh, jeez.
They had I think 3, and this one's on track to be similar. And so like people who think it's over, there's a whole phase coming around November into like March next year. That's, if it follows the trajectory of what happened with the Spanish flu, which we're kind of making the same mistakes
History
again.
repeats
I
itself.
put on my soapbox, but people are wanting to do what people want to do, and Americans like to do what they want to do, but the virus doesn't really care what we want to do. And if you go and you don't have a vaccine, you don't have antivirals, and it's still virulent, you have no human beings don't have an immunity, it's going to go to second, third wave. It's just, you can want what you want, but the coronavirus is going to do what it does.
My mom's Catholic, so my mom has this old expression that like she says all the time. It's man makes plans, God laughs.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to be a bearer of bad tidings, but like in Arizona and places where it's 100 degrees, they have higher death counts than New York City, and they thought the heat was going to kill it, and their numbers are not going down below 1%. They're hitting like 2, 3, 4%. And under the CDC guidelines, if you're at 1%, you shouldn't be going back to work. And if you got places out in the Midwest and the South, they're like 3 and 5%. And so, that doesn't bode well for like this going downward.
The best case scenario is if I had like a best way that this could possibly turn out, everyone stay the heck home, like just in as much as humanly possible. But the issue is that we
we have to work. I mean, some people have to work. I was an Uber for a while, and I had to just stop just because it wasn't tenable and it was dangerous. I know there's a lot of Uber still going, but like a lot of it has stopped because we just looked at it and said, well, you know what? It's not going to work. So I'm doing other things, but it's just, you can want to do it. And I know a bunch of guys that kept on doing it and they got sick. And it's hard to not get sick in that type of work. And I did it for a long time as a second job, and you really can't do it. You can try, but eventually it's going to catch up to you. And it's just like, you got too many people in the car. You're going too many places, and it just doesn't work. I mean, the only thing a lot of guys are doing now is delivery. It's very dangerous to try to do what we used to do. And we used to make money by having 3-4 people in the car.
The more money you get,
yeah, that's how much we make. That's how the model works. Now we're being told, like, if you're an Uber, you can't do that. You can't have somebody in the front seat. Everybody's got to wear a mask. And then we got people that don't want to wear masks. So I'm like, I'm not playing that game. So I stopped. But yeah, it's just hard. I mean, so that was my way of my second gig. back to just doing in-home, IT consulting, because I'm a programmer, so I can do that. So I just got ramped up to just doing a lot of programming code. So luckily I have that skill set. But yeah, it's hard, for a lot of people that kind of go outside. And I mean, I was out there, so I do get it. But yeah, everybody should just stay safe, do what you can, and like if you can do things yourself, be the self-reliant person, invest in trying to learn how to engineer as much as you can. Go on all the tutorials out there on the web on how to use audio interfaces, and how to wire your stuff up so you don't get noise. There's all kinds of tutorials on how to like do your wiring right when you do a recording, when you start to set up your own recording studio, so you don't get white noise. And if you watch how you're supposed to use plugs, and how you're supposed to make things are grounded so you don't get that noise. There's a lot of cool stuff out there you can
That's
get
kind
that's
of like
free.
what I
They'll
do
tell you
like
what to
about
do.
technology is the fact that like is that kind of information. Because if I'm being very honest with you, like in terms of how I learned how to play guitar, I mean I grew up pretty poor. I had like a first act guitar, and that was the only thing I had to my name, and it was my mom couldn't afford like lessons, so she gave me like something to just give me like a little bit of like a base. I think it was like a $35 like crash course at like a local high school. And once I was like, oh, that's how you do that. Okay, and then I went to YouTube for tutorials just about how to play the guitar.
Yeah, there's great stuff out there showing you how to become a recording engineer, like how to make sure that you got balanced signals, that you don't get white noise, that you can when you're doing your engineering and you have an audio interface, how to master like what you're looking for to get that sound. And there's a lot of cool tools, and once you have them, it's a matter of like people got time, if they're locked down, then you can kind of dive into it and get better at it. I mean, it's a whole art, and if you are in a situation where you can use a recording engineer, yeah, I love recording engineers, and it's art in itself. But it's not a bad thing to learn as a musician,
Yeah,
because
because
it gives you more
I mean,
control over your work.
there's like the old saying, if you know how to do it yourself, you'll know what's best for you, and you're not going to be able to like be pushed around or like kind of by the nose.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, because once you start getting into it, it's art in itself. It's like it's the rest of the painting, you know. Because like you kind of are in the hands of a recording engineer and a producer if you don't know it, and you got to make sure to get what you want to hear if you actually learn how to do it. And being an electronic musician, we tend to have equipment that puts us in a better position to do that, because that's what we do with our modes and stuff. We have a lot of equipment that allows us to capture it that way, so we're pretty close to being like that, because we just deal with I create sounds. My whole art of being an
Yeah,
electronic musician,
there's
I
a wave
create
synthesis that happens,
tones,
and like that's why
and
you
I
buy a mode
and
because you
so
want absolute control.
yeah, that's why. I mean, so everything I do with all my equipment is all about sound engineering. So a
Yeah.
synthesis is already kind of close to being a sound engineer. So that's not such a big dive into it. But for bands that aren't into that, it is a little bit of a slope to get into it. But yeah, I mean, I would encourage anybody to look at the things that are affordable and the capabilities, and we might be you might have to be more self-reliant. So that's I kind of put that out there. All the bands, I mean, the last couple of bands I've been talking to, people always like, well, yeah, I'm learning Ableton, I'm getting audio interfaces, I'm buying condenser mics, I'm doing all kinds of, the last couple of bands I
I
talked
mean,
to,
it's
that's
sage
where
advice
they
at
were
this
going.
point because I mean
um
one of the things that I've kind of like experienced as this thing has gone along, like non-musically, is how people generally aren't ready for like when things like actually go down like this. I mean, not even like in a job sense. I mean, or like a way that like someone could see this one coming from like a mile away, but more, but like more or less. I mean,
oh yeah,
how many people like if they really needed to right now could change a tire on their car? How many people right now could, if they like couldn't bring their guitar to Guitar Center, but they really want to play their guitar, could change their own strings? Or how many people would?
yeah. I mean, a lot of people have like lost the ability to do stuff, and it's a lot of it is that you have to kind of be like that kind of jack of all trades. My history is my grandpa was a coal miner in West Virginia in Morgantown. He built his house from scratch because coal miners kind of had to know how to be a carpenter, electrician, and a plumber. So they had to kind of know everything. As I kind of came up through a tradition of my family having, the ability to say, well, you know what, I built some of my modular synths from the boards, and so I like to build stuff. I'm kind of an information technology guy. I like to tear things apart and put them back together. And so in that way, I'm in a good position to be able to do stuff because I know how to make my stuff and fix it and change it. But like you said, right, the world up to this, you could just go and have somebody do it for you. You didn't have to know how to do it. And now people are going to have to go get those kind of old world skills like my grandpa that had, he couldn't get anybody to sell him a house. So he had to build his own. It was, different world when he didn't really like him, who he was in 1930 in Morgantown, West Virginia. Being a black coal miner is like, oh, well, we're not going to sell you the house. So
but
well,
there's the beauty to that. There's like the level of like people.
And he did.
I don't think that people understand how wonderful self-reliance can be at a time. Because I mean, when you know that you've got your own back hook, line, and sinker, and that there's nothing in the world that's gonna stop you from having your own back except like something that's so otherworldly, then yeah, like you don't like there's things that you don't have to worry about. Like, and I've noticed this in like even in my own circle. I mean, I've noticed how many people. I mean, like I said, I grew up with like very little money. I mean, I've never seen so many people freak out about how long unemployment. I mean, don't get me wrong, unemployment takes a lot longer now because of this thing, but they're so surprised at like how long unemployment takes.
Oh, yeah.
Like, yep, I've been there before, and they tend to take a long time before they even give you a dime. And,
oh yeah, I mean, my daughter was doing like hydroponic gardening because she was looking at global warming, and she's like, well, I need to be more self-reliant. And we went and got solar panels on our house, so we kind of have some capabilities. And she just doubled down when she saw this thing going in January, and she's got like all like greenhouses and hydroponic gardens, and we were like growing our own vegetables. And yeah, and we're kind of like all these people are like, you got veggies? Like, yeah, because we're growing our own. So it's like, yeah, well, seeds don't cost that much, and hydroponic capability. My daughter, she's kind of a science geek like myself, and she's like, I'm going to do hydroponics because that was back in January.
She's ahead of her time because I don't think anybody also saw farmers literally like just throwing and like
growing stuff out. Yeah. Well, my daughter kind of thought that she saw stuff going on in Wuhan in December, and she's kind of like always ahead of the curve, and she's like, well, this doesn't look good. And I remember like around December, she told me like, well, this thing looks like a 1918 type of thing. And I'm like, what? And I was at work and I wasn't really paying attention. And my daughter's like, well, I'm doubling down on my hydroponic garden.
She was right though. I mean,
I'm like, okay. and she was totally like right, because she said, well, this thing looks pretty bad. And she was just, she's a science person, so she was watching all this science stuff. She's watching the news, and she's like, she kind of saw it coming. And she convinced my wife, and like they actually started buying canned goods in January. And said that this thing was probably gonna be bad. And I'm like, everybody was like, how did you guys? Well, they're patient. I mean, Biden actually said stuff if you watch the news. But people weren't paying attention, because they were watching sports or they were doing this, doing their life. And then people don't want to be pessimistic. But we were always kind of more willing to look at like pessimistic things or things that maybe people don't like because it's not happy.
Well, yeah, people don't like anything that disagrees with
and
like
we've
their
always
general
kind of been
comfort.
in that place.
They don't like to be like disturbed.
Yeah. So I mean, I kind of had a plan. It's like, if this thing gets out of control, I'm going to stop. And I filed for my unemployment like 2 weeks before it hit the fan because I stopped Ubering at the end of February. like February 22nd, I stopped Ubering. The state of Massachusetts did like a state of emergency and said, and everything started going crazy around here in the Northeast. My neck of the woods in New Hampshire, when Massachusetts locked down, we're like, okay, that's the sign. Massachusetts declared a state of emergency. I stopped Ubering on February 22nd and filed for unemployment like on the 23rd, ahead of like 2 weeks ahead of the big wash.
I had a weird feeling. I didn't know it was going to be a pandemic, but I had a weird feeling something was brewing because, and this is less on the science side of things. This is more on like the current events, like social, political kind of side of things. I read somewhere. I want to say it was like either late December or probably really early January that Warren Buffett, who's like a billionaire, was sitting on the largest like stock like threshold of cash in his portfolio that he's ever sat on in his entire career. So for me, I was like thinking, okay, this means either one of two things: he's about to die, or he knows something's about to hit the fan. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, so I have a weird feeling the economy is going to take a plunge. And lo and behold, it's. I think.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, what we saw, like I said, around February 22nd, what really kicked off for me is a big biotech firm in Cambridge, Boston, right? They actually a company called Biogen. 88 people that went to a convention center got the virus, and that to me, with my daughter, who's kind of a science person, said, well, that's going to cause a cluster. That's going to go exponential. It's going to go like 5-6 times, and that number, and it went way more than that. Probably went 20-30 times, but that's when I said, well, yeah, I got to get out of it, because I was going into Boston taking people to Logan as an Uber, and then that whole area started getting to be a problem around that time. And we just said, that's not going to be good. The fact that we had 88 people in Boston, Mass, get the coronavirus was supposed to be something that should have never got here, like H1N1 or SARS. That's what people didn't understand. I kind of knew that, because I actually was living in Tokyo in 2004 during SARS. And so we had some experience. My family had lived in Tokyo, and they had really good procedures that kept that from going crazy. But here the protocols weren't followed. Like 40,000 to 400,000 people were allowed to travel out of Wuhan around the world through airline travel that normally would have got locked down. Because they didn't get locked down, when I saw that 88 of them had shown up in Boston, I said, well, that's like Ebola showing up in Boston. That's something that like shouldn't happen. And once you see that, I saw that, I said, well,
and to your point about the Ebola thing, Ebola was a scary one all of its own. I mean, Ebola is like more like, I want to say it's scary in terms of.
That's even nightmare. It's like smallpox. I mean, it's like the nightmare scenario, but this is pretty close. To be like it's something you see in a contagion movie, like a science fiction movie. Protocols are supposed to lock the people down. No one should have traveled out of Wuhan once they realized what was going on, and travel to Europe really kind of screwed us up. We had all these travelers that came out of China, went to Europe, and then Europe came to the U.S. and Canada and everywhere else. And airline travel and the cruise ship travel really like blew us out, because people didn't follow protocols and didn't lock people down. Like during H1N1 and SARS, people got locked down for like 15-20 days and weren't allowed to travel back. And when I was in Tokyo, there were people in Hong Kong and Tokyo that weren't allowed to go back to the U.S. They were told to stay in quarantine, and those procedures weren't followed for whatever reason, and that's why where we are. But I was in that time when they were followed and we didn't get it. So it's something that wasn't done. That's before.
The thing that kind of is baffling to me, because we kind of know how to do this by now. Like, I mean, as a people, I mean, like, it's not to say that we don't have historical precedent for how these things typically are either avoided or how they typically start.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing was that anybody that was in Wuhan, anybody that was in that area when SARS happened, they locked down South Korea, they locked down Tokyo. They pretty much what they did is they did the contact tracing. They found the first carriers, and they contact traced them all, and they locked them into quarantine. We totally didn't botch that. I mean, it most likely is because Wuhan was a big international manufacturing base, and you had tons of expats. Like I was an expat back in Tokyo, 2004, and the expats are kind of white collar, high end people, and they all kind of complained they didn't want to be in lockdown. They complained back in 2004, but the government said, we don't care if you don't want to be in quarantine, you got to be in quarantine. But in this situation, they pulled their favors, and we got this. When the government should have been more forceful and said, I don't care if you're a CEO, I don't care if you're a director, you need to be in quarantine for 14, 20 days. We need to watch you, and then you're not going anywhere until you're out.
Here's the
And
interesting
that's kind
part
of what
about this
happened
whole
to us.
thing. It's because, I mean, on the one hand, like, you always have the people who are like, they're trying to trample on like my individual freedoms. Meanwhile, you're carrying something which could potentially kill.
Well, that's the protocol. Is it's a dangerous thing, and your freedom is understandable. But if you have a disease that there's no human immunity to, like SARS or H1N1,
well, that's
those
my thing. It's
protocols
like
were followed.
Your freedom
So
ends when it begins to infringe on like the rights and like freedoms of like other people, and like in this case, the right to live should be like
yeah,
like I would.
yeah, man. They had all these examples of expats that went to Seattle, that went to New York, and they were asymptomatic, and they spread it on the plane, they spread it on the train, they spread it in the station, and it just went exponential, which it would if you run the protocols and you look at the history. Because I was in the middle of a potential pandemic back in 2004 when I was in Tokyo, and it was scary. We were told we couldn't really go back home until they really, and I wasn't scheduled to go, so it wasn't a big deal to me. I was there for 2 years, and I just got there, and so I wasn't in a situation where I needed to go back home. But anybody that wanted to go back home for like a vacation or whatever, they were kind of, I'm inconvenienced, they won't let me go. I said,
You
well,
shouldn't be going anywhere.
that's actually what you
Because
should
here's
do.
the thing: if they have you under quarantine, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to like abuse you or torture.
No, you just can't go. They had deals, and I mean, Tokyo is one of the best cities in the world. I mean, quarantine in Tokyo wasn't a big hassle. Quarantine in Wuhan wouldn't have been a big hassle to an expat. It's just you couldn't do what you wanted that moment. And that's in hindsight, people are going to have to, in the future, be more willing to say, if there's something like that, you gotta follow it. There's no exception because you're this type of person. It's something that you should do for your fellow man. We had a breakdown in empathy for your fellow man. My opinion, the people decided what they wanted to do. Yeah, what they wanted to do was more important. I'm like, okay.
What you want to do also has the little caveat of possibly killing hundreds, if not millions, of people as well, though. So that's one.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame that's where
right.
we are. I hate to get into the politics of it, but we are living in a situation. But history is like, I'm a big history buff. As a history major, and people really need to. Everybody's so technical today, and people don't like to read. But people need to go back in this time, since we have time, and read about the Spanish flu. People really need to read about what happened. And before they go and they yell at somebody for telling them to put a mask on, they need to read some information so they can get some context. Last thing I would say to people.
You're absolutely on the money, though, and like honestly, it's good to speak to a history major about this one because it's kind of, when you think about it, like if like everyone like has like in this country, like to have an American education means you were taught about what like 100 years ago was like. You were taught about what 200 years ago was like, and people generally have like some kind of a knowledge about the fact that the Great Depression was a thing, far right fascism in Europe was a thing, and like there are so many mistakes that consistently get repeated, and it's like people don't know history, and there's that old saying that people who don't know history.
Yeah, well, there's some people in our Southland and our Midwest that are
Mm-hmm.
making the 1918 mistake, and they're doing it for certain reasons. I don't understand. And these are people that should know history because they're in government. Um, it's like it's a tragedy for the people that live in those states. All I can say is anybody listening that lives there, do what you think is right. For your own family's sake, don't listen to somebody who has ulterior motives for their own personal gratification. Um, because you have one life, and like I hear people saying, well, there's more
Oh, there's
things
more things
to
to
life
life
than
than
life.
living.
I'm
I
like,
don't know.
really?
Something tells me you can't enjoy.
Yeah. It's like I guess that's somebody that's gonna stay in the basement and want
I
me to go to the
that's
front
so
line.
you're this is definitely a breach of empathy for humanity, like in the weirdest way.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's people who want to do herd immunity. There's a certain group of people in this country that say, okay, it's too expensive. Let everybody go out. We'll take like a 2% hit, a 2 to like 6% hit of the American population because we'll get herd immunity, and I don't know. It's like I'm willing to take that cost because I just don't want to be bothered with being more empathetic. And I think that has to be looked at in the lens of history about like what people did in 1932 and 33. There are certain people in Germany that had kind of beliefs that were very unempathetic. And so people need to look at Americans that talk like that and
Yeah,
think about what that type of American is acting like. Because that's not very, uh, everybody's talking about we are one. We are one, but
yeah.
there's
It's
some
like
people that have
we're
guns.
one until everyone decides that they're like inconvenienced, and then like they're all of a sudden saying, "Oh, look, we don't want unity. We want our individual." But and it's not even like,
Well, there's certain people that say that we are
yeah,
one and you don't need tests, and then they get tested every day. And there's other people that can't get a test, and then you say it doesn't matter that you don't need tests. And there's a certain class of people that are getting tested every day, multiple times a day, and there's other people who don't. So then you have to start
well, I
wondering
think it should be
what's
no
going on.
surprise that like it's corruption at its finest. I mean, you just take a good look at it, and like, there's nothing about this that doesn't reek of some semblance of corruption. I mean, you look at it and the way it's handled.
Yeah, we fought Henry VIII so that we
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't have an aristocracy. Yeah, and it seems like there's certain people that somehow think they're going to get the shine off the
Oh
aristocrat's
yeah.
shoe and somehow become have a Horatio Alger myth. But I don't understand people like that. It's like, okay, well, you drive a truck and this is a billionaire and you're going to get the shine off his shoe and magically maybe become a billionaire. Like that's a fantasy. So why would you do what's in their interest and not in your interest
I think that people want
and
to see
think that
good
that's
people
going to
that
help you?
exist.
When the American ethos is not
I
to
think
do
people
that,
want to
is to
see
be
good
more
in
cynical
people
of
that
that.
don't like understand that these are people who have ulterior motives. And every single time, like someone's got the you can do it as long as you put on your bootstraps and you do the whole and oh no,
Well,
agreed.
I believe in hard work. I mean, I take 3, 4 jobs, but my whole thing, yeah. But my whole problem is when people do things like cronyism, and it's like there's a lot of behaviors happening here that aren't actually in the American spirit. They're more in the Stalin spirit. They're more in the Castro spirit. For people who were so anti-communist, and if you look at the behavior, there's some behaviors here that don't jibe with like federalism, that don't jibe with individualism, they jibe with totalitarianism. And so the problem from people are getting a shiny object in front of them and not understanding there's somebody who's pulling like a Pinochet or a Stalin-esque type of behavior and then wrapping themselves in a flag, and the shiny object is making you
And
ignore
that's what I find really
the stench of
interesting
the
is the fact that like
totalitarianism.
you're absolutely right. It's like you have like it's like the worst aspects of communism too, in the sense that like nothing is important but the state, or like in this case, I guess our case would be like the economy and the state of the current world. But at the same time, like that's in communist Russia eyes, that was the same mentality. It's just it wasn't about the economy as much as it was about like the USSR.
Yeah. What we've kind of turned into is a
Yes.
form of government called feudalism. And what we have are an aristocratic, 1% that own 90% of the property and assets. And we have people who are more like indentured servants with little access to anything within the American construct, being told that somehow they're going to get to be in that 1%. And that's like an impossibility. And they are buying something that Madison and
Yeah.
Adams and Washington fought against. And so I would just argue that any American need to understand, they need to read the Federalist Papers, they need to read the Constitution, they need to read the Articles of Confederation, and then look at the behaviors that are occurring and see if it jives with what the Federalist Papers and the Constitution itself say. And if
Hell,
you've
you could even
read
take it
it
back to
and you
what
looked at it, you would
inspired
see that it
those
doesn't.
documents in the first place. I mean, at the root of all of those papers, you have John Locke, and you have people like Aristotle. And John Locke and Aristotle, people can basically kind of make it seem like they were like conservative in the sense that they were talking about like building yourself up by your bootstraps, or being a part of like a middle class or a working class. But at the same time, John Locke has a great part about those acorns, where he's talking about like you should take it like enough that you can basically earn what you earn, but not so much that you impede on the progress of others to sustain what they want if they're going to do something about it. And Aristotle was for a class of people who were like willing to do something to like basically like obtain their middle class status, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it was unattainable. You have to like scrap and scrape.
Well, yeah, I mean, American belief is like, you can, build yourself up, but the problem is, in the world where they lived, they didn't have
Mm-hmm.
people making 10,000 times more the average salary, and they didn't have constructs that keep you from being able to like own a farm and own like be a blacksmith, be a plumber, be a, an artisan. And so we've kind of devolved into industrial system that uses labor from a communist country, and then doesn't encourage labor in our own country. So all of our supply chains, I'm an IT guy, all of our supply chains are like in places like Wuhan, and we don't have our materials here because we don't build the stuff here. And if you don't build stuff, the wealth being generated in the world now is in Seoul and Wuhan. The people who have businesses that actually build stuff
What I
are
find
in
even
those
more frightening
places
is
in the
how
world,
those
not
jobs
here.
that are over there, and like that's human rights
So
violations all the way, and it's been that way for a long.
yeah, it's like the worst aspects of capitalism, because you have a communist country that forces almost indentured servitude in manufacturing. They have a white collar that does jobs like our white collar, but their blue collar doesn't have any rights. And so then you've got very low cost, and then you have all this production, and then the people in the aristocracy level across the world, in the West and in the East, are on the
And here's
backs
what's
of
even
pretty much
crazier about all that.
slave
I have
labor.
a weird feeling that sooner or later, it's only a matter of time before those jobs are replaced too, and that's what's even scary.
Well, by robots, yeah. Well, everything's going to go to robots, and if you have everything going robotic,
Well, that's the other thing. It's like, I
then
mean,
what
what
are
like
people going
the
to
people
do?
who are blue collar and have hardly any rights, are they just going to be doing nothing? Because I mean, it's not like you.
Well, the problem with the feudal systems and communist systems are
Yep, gulags.
historically have massive prison systems. And if you look at the Soviet Union had massive amounts of prisons all over the Soviet Union. That when people weren't workers, they were slave workers in a prison. Chinese system has the same thing. Our system is starting to do the same thing. So that is the trajectory that you get when you get political systems to become unequal. At the imbalance of our system is tilting toward what you saw in the Soviet Union, what you still see in China, and it's not what you saw in Chile in the 70s. Massive prison structures, to put those people in, and that's something that people need to look at what they're doing. You need to look at what is going on, and it's not happy talk, but you have to start questioning how things are running. And this is a time when people should take that time to kind of think about how the world is running and what you need to do to make it better for the next generation. Because if we just keep on being consumers and not thinking,
Yeah,
some of our
I'm to
choices are
agree.
going
I
to
mean,
get taken away.
that's what's weird about this current time is like how I want to say blind. I don't know if the word is blind or ignorant or just in the dark about how close to these things we can get when we don't do anything about certain things. I mean, like we have a system of checks and balances at the moment that, for all intents and purposes, was supposed to be put in place to keep things in check and to keep things in balance. And it's like it might as well not exist in some aspects. And
Well, yeah, I mean, all the gates have been, the coronavirus is like an actual real, like, actual
incredibly
representation of what's happened to our political system. The gate fell apart, and the gates in our political system at the same time fell apart, which like caused the disaster to be exponentially worse than it had to be. Um, and because of what Madison and all of the great people who designed our system didn't anticipate that the Senate wouldn't do its job. The president is not a monarch, and it's never supposed to have unlimited power. But our presidency now is way beyond what it should be, based on the structure of what they wanted it to be. And there's going to have to be a reckoning on how much presidential power is there versus congressional power. Now, regardless of what party you're in, you're going to want to be well
no,
aware that
absolutely.
you don't want your president to be a monarch, to be
Yeah.
Henry VIII. One man should not be able to decide that they're not going to build PPE, that they're not going to go and do tests because he doesn't want to do it. I mean, how can you have a system that says one man can take apart the 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 agency that's supposed to look at pandemics because he wants to take the money and put it to a wall? You're going to let somebody knock all the gates down. That is not anticipated in American history that our Congress would allow the president to do that. It was supposed to be a check. Say, if you do something that's unreasonable, they're going to check you. And what we have now is a system that does not check you if that person happens
No,
to be in
not.
the same party. And that is not supposed to happen that way. And so we are in a situation because people
I
allowed their politics to
1000%
override the
agree with
common sense.
that.
And it's people get mad, and I'm sure there are people that won't like where I went with this episode, but we're in a different time, and I think people should be allowed. Part of being an American, we have a right to say what we want to say, and this is political speech or speech, and it's free, and we get to speak our mind. But it's an informed mind, and people, if they're honest about
Oh
it,
no,
go
nothing
check
that you've said here is
what
a
I've been
lie
saying
today.
is
As a
not
matter of fact,
exactly
it's
untrue.
interesting that like this started off as like more of a thing about like the band, but at the same time it like moved into something that is definitely a discussion that's worth having, and it's definitely a discussion that's worth looking at because like people are asking why is this all happening right now, and the answer is before your very eyes, and there is a detailed response to it, and you can actually get to the root of how we wound up exactly where we are right today if you just pay attention. I think that like in an age of information, like the ignorance to like decide what you want to know and what you don't want to know, that's such a that's
Well, I think it's easier for people to zone out and binge watch Netflix
yep, that's
than
absolutely
to
right.
actually go in that some 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 facts, some fact. Happy talk makes you feel good. Luckily my daughter's 20 years old, so I don't have to talk like I'm talking to Teletubbies. Yeah, but I understand what parents. Okay,
No,
if you got little young children, you don't want to make them scared. That's fine. But beyond that, you should still have a talk with your significant other about
well,
what's
that's one of
going
the
on,
other
not
things that I've
just binge
also kind
watching
of come to
Netflix.
realize about like